Dear students, welcome back to this video series where we'll be discussing about the application questions for our Emath paper 2. So the question that we have here today is taken from our 2019 N-level paper, right? So let's look at the question together. For this question, we are given some information in terms of graphs as well as some tables. Okay, so what we are looking at is actually the information for international visitors that are arriving in Singapore. Okay, so the first information that we have over here tells us the number of tourists, right, in thousands, right, from 4 different countries that are actually visiting Singapore, right, in both 2017 and 2018. So the 4 countries are Indonesia, China, Malaysia, and Australia. Okay, the next information tells us the mean length of stay in Singapore for all tourists. Okay, so for all of these tourists from these countries, right, in 2017 we see that they are staying on average 3.7 days, and in 2018, right, the average number of days actually falls slightly and it's actually 3.6. Okay, and the next information that we have is actually a breakdown of how tourists that visit Singapore actually spend their money. Okay, so we see that the 4 categories in which they spend their money on is on shopping, accoms, food and beverage, okay, F&B, as well as others. Right, so we actually have the information for both 2017 and 2018. Right, so for example, you see that Australians might have changed their taste and preferences in just 1 year. Right, so let's look at the last information. It tells us the mean amount of money, right, that tourists actually spent during their stay, and we are only focusing on these 2 countries, China and Australia, right, for the years 2017 and 2018 respectively. Okay, so based on this information, let's try to answer the question. Okay, the first question requires us to calculate the total number of tourists from China and Australia, right, who visited Singapore in 2018. Okay, this is quite simple, right? Right, and we just simply need to write our answer to the nearest million. Okay, and it's only 1 mark. So, right, looking at the table, we are simply using these 2 values. So China and Australia, right? So 2106, right? This is in thousands, and we have to add 1044, right? And in thousands as well, right? So if you sum this up, you should get 3.15 times 10 to the power 6, right? But we want to round off our answer to the nearest million, right? So in this case, we have to simply look at the 100,000 place, right? In this case, the 100,000 place is 1, so this number remains, right? So this is actually 3 million. Okay, so 3 million. Okay, so that's easy 1 mark. The next part requires us to calculate the total amount spent by these tourists from China, okay, in 2018, right, as well as correcting our answer to the nearest million. So for this question, likewise, let's look at how many China tourists visited Singapore. 2106, right? So 2106 multiplied by 10 to the power 3, because that's in thousands, right? So this is the number of tourists, and how much do they spend on average in 2018? How much do Chinese tourists spend? So looking at this information over here, right? So in 2018, Chinese tourists spent on average 1205, okay, on their trip. So 1205, and if you were to press out your calculator, right? Oh, remember to write your statements clearly. So total amount is equals to 2537730,000, right? Okay, so we are looking at the nearest million as well. Okay, so nearest million. So let's look at this 100,000 digits. So this is more than 5, right? So this guy rounds up. So this is 2538,000,000. Okay, and that gives us 2538 million. Okay, alternatively, you may want to write your answer as times 10 to the power 6. Okay, so these two are equivalent. Okay, so that is for part B. Right, so let's look at part C. Based on 2018 data, right, a tourist from Australia is expected to spend $979 in total during their stay. So how much would a tourist from Australia spend per day, right, during their stay? So this is also a very easy question, right? So in order to find the how much do they spend a day, we have to, so let's write the statement first. Total amount, right, we have to simply divide by the number of days which they are staying in Singapore, right? So in this case, how many days do they stay in Singapore? Right, for all tourists in 2018, right, on average 3.6. So we should have 3.6 over here, and this would give us $271.944, right? But there's no requirement, so by default you should leave your answers to 2 decimal place, right? So 271.94, right? So 2 dp. Okay, so this is also another simple question. I hope you guys can get the marks easily, yeah? Okay, so the next and final part actually requires us to answer this question, which consists of 4 marks. So we expect to have a little bit more working, right? So let's see how we can tackle this question, right? So basically they are just telling us a cafe focuses its marketing on tourists, right, on either China or Australia. Okay, so how does it focus, right? So basically they focus their attention by calculating the average amount spent per tourist during their stay on F&B, right? So based on 2017 data, okay, a tourist from China spend more on food and beverage, right, as compared to a tourist from Australia. Okay, and as a result, the cafe would actually focus its marketing on tourists from China instead. Logical, right? Okay, because they spend more, so they are a bigger, right, consumer group in this case. So what the question wants us to do is that based on 2018 data, right, okay, we should actually use calculations to determine if a cafe should continue to focus its marketing on Chinese tourists, right? So we have to actually show our workings, yeah? So let's look at some information from the table, right? So let's just simply calculate how much does, okay, a China tourist spend, okay, when they stay in Singapore in 2018. Okay, so we see that the average amount spent by Chinese tourists on average, right, is 1,205, right? Okay, and the proportion in which they spend their money on F&B is simply 9%. Okay, so out of this amount, 9% will be spent on F&B. So let's calculate how much money does a Chinese tourist spend on F&B. So amount spent on F&B by Chinese tourists, okay, this is in 2018, is simply 1,205 multiplied by 9%, and that gives us 108.45. Okay, likewise we can actually calculate, right, the amount spent by an Australian tourist in 2018. Okay, so let's look at the data again. Australian tourists spend 979, right? But however, their proportion of their spending on F&B is larger at 16% as compared to 9% for the Chinese tourists, right? So in this case, we should have 979 multiplied by 16%. And if you were to press your calculator, you should get 156.64. Right, and this is 2dp. Right, so it's quite clear, right? In this case, we see that the Australian tourist spends more than that of these Chinese tourists on F&B in 2018. Right, so therefore, what is our concluding statement? So since the average amount spent by each Chinese tourist is lesser than that. Okay, on what? Okay, to be precise, on F&B in 2018 is less than that of an Australian tourist So what's the conclusion? Should the cafe continue to focus its marketing on Chinese tourists? No. Okay, so no, the cafe should not, right, spend or rather focus their marketing on Chinese tourists. Right, and we are done. Okay, so these are the 4 parts which you should be trying your best to understand and attempt on your own. Okay, all the best for your revision.